Hi friends, this is Sam. I am going to show you a little bit about Chapter 6 of the SIOP book. This is all about interaction, which is basically student-to-student interaction, student-to-teacher interaction, really anything that allows people to talk with each other. This is a quote I just pulled from the front. For English learners to become fluent in academic English, they need to be provided with structured opportunities in all subject areas to practice using the language. That's again from the textbook. This basically the overall idea of this. It reminds me a lot of when we talked in Binks's class in the fall about disciplinary literacy, giving students an opportunity to become literate, not just in English in general or whatever we're talking about, but specifically in the discourse of our content area, whether that's math or social studies or English. Speak fluently, vocabulary of that discipline in a way that makes them sort of I think we call it a content insider in Binks's class. Basically, again, this is that teachers should not be talking very much in class. Teachers should be interacting with students. Students should be doing a lot of talking themselves, both with the teacher and with other students to help practice and perfect their language skills. Different rules from our chapter that I will present to you here. The first one is frequent interaction. You need to plan between your students and with your students as they are English language learners. Why do that? Oral language development and reading comprehension are related. Basically, if studies have shown that if you practice oral discourse, your reading comprehension of a text that you are working with will go up. Likewise, if you're not proficient in a language, you're not going to be able to comprehend texts in that language. So oral written back and forth communication leads to greater proficiency because it's more at-bats for a person to practice that language. What does it look like? 4 steps as presented in the textbook to this frequent interaction process. The first is that the teacher will introduce a theme or a topic for the day. The teacher will then lead the students in making predictions and activating prior knowledge about that theme or topic. Then they actually dive into the text itself. The text should be chunked up into smaller pieces, and there should be frequent opportunities after each chunk for kids to talk with each other, to discuss, to get feedback from the teacher, those kinds of things. So again, A, check on their own understanding, and B, strengthen their language skills. Number 4, use of textual evidence. This goes sort of like hand in hand with number 3, but basically this is the idea that students shouldn't just be answering yes or no to teacher questions. They should be responding thoughtfully and their responses through whatever text you are working with. Second rule is intentional grouping. We've all heard a lot about this one, so I won't spend a ton of time on it. Basically, you do it because it makes instruction a lot easier to differentiate, and because especially our students, the adolescents that we're going to be working with, are much more responsive to group work than individual work or being talked at by a teacher. Make sure your groups are varied. The one big thing the text noted was that you can't just group kids by one sort of ability level, because that has some pretty profound social and cognitive effects, which almost all of which are negative for not in the quote unquote smart group. So you can group by language ability, you can group heterogeneously. There's actually, the text presented a lot of indicated that heterogeneous ability grouping is beneficial for English language learners because it allows them to practice their language in new and different ways. Those who can model sort of effective language use, that those being the high achieving students. Also, make certain that you're not automatically grouping all your ELLs with low achievers. That happens a lot. And a student may be extraordinarily high achieving in a given academic subject, but not necessarily able to communicate super well. So it's actually doing everyone a disservice if you are doing some intentional grouping to put that student with some lower performers. Sufficient wait time is option number 3, so that's a picture of Doug Lamoff. Again, we know what this is. Basically, ELLs need longer to process than other people do, other students do, etc. So you need to make certain that you are providing enough wait time after you ask a question. Likewise, there's some different cultures have different wait time norms. I forget who it was, somebody in the text, some countries it's like common to wait for very long periods of time, even minutes in classrooms for kids to answer. Obviously, that's not the case in most American classrooms, so you kind of have to negotiate that as a teacher yourself. What does this one look like? It's obvious. Pause for a few seconds after each question, vary up your wait time. You know what the deal is. One point that the text raised as well is that sometimes you have students who maybe are high performing or know the answer and then get kind of angsty when you are waiting for their peers to chew things over and process cognitively. So one option you might do is something like giving those impatient students alternatives to a verbal response. For example, writing answers down rather than shouting them out. Last rule here, clarify or provide opportunities for students to clarify questions they have using native language, L1, their native language. Why do that? It seems obvious, but if kids are confused about what you're doing, they're going to be able to ask questions and better access what's going on, be able to understand better if you are communicating with them in the language with which they are most comfortable. There's apparently academic research on whether or not L1 use is really super beneficial. The SIOP model says learn the native language. If you're in a classroom full of Spanish speakers, for instance, it's quite all right to, if they're lost, talk to them in Spanish to help them sort of understand a concept, a process, whatever it may be. Obviously, what does it look like? Talk to kids using their native. Obviously, also requires some native language proficiency on your part as a teacher or on the part of a classroom aide. Maybe you have an ELL aide in the room. Some ideas on implementation. This is how I'll close this out. There's a few different things you can do. The text gave a lot of different learning activities. One common thread, though I didn't want to throw all of them at you guys, but so one common thread was that they're very authentic learning tasks. For instance, in an economics class, rather than just memorizing, supply and demand charts, let kids do a project, things on eBay. So they have to communicate with each other about gathering items and then putting together the actual site posting on eBay, negotiating that entire process. That all is not only content knowledge, but they are getting lots of opportunities to practice interacting in a new language. You can also present a lot of discussion scenarios. For instance, you have to go to dinner with 4 people. What people do you go with? What do you serve? Why do you make those choices? That kind of thing. Sort of more identifiable and possibly more intrinsically interesting scenarios for students that, again, allow them to talk with each other, practice that language discourse. Dialogue journals I've not used them in my own teaching, but I have encountered the idea before. That's where a student journals and then a teacher takes their journal and writes them notes in the margins, and then the student takes those back, writes feedback or notes or comments or responses to the teacher's notes, and then further improves their writing. And that's sort of a cyclical process, a lot of formative assessment there. That is not oral interaction, but that is still interaction between a teacher and a student. That's more opportunities again for them to practice getting those language skills. Lastly, some differentiation ideas. Sentence stems, probably most of us know are very useful. You can use sentence stems in different ways depending on how high performing the kids are in your room. You can recommend that sort of higher students with higher language skills just kind of use the sentence when they're stuck, whereas those with lower language skills can literally read the sentence stem and just kind of fill in the blank as they are crafting a response. I mean, this is obvious, this is repetitive, but student choice and activity is important even in these interaction things. So that is it. That is interaction as it relates to the SIOP model. Thank you very much for listening.